There comes a moment in many lives when the structures that once held meaning suddenly collapse. The career that promised fulfillment feels hollow. The relationships that once sustained us seem like performances in a play whose plot we have forgotten. The beliefs that oriented our existence ring false, like words repeated so many times they dissolve into mere sounds. We stand in the wreckage of our former certainties and ask the question that has no answer. What is the point of any of this? The 20th century gave birth to a peculiar affliction, not the absence of food, shelter, or safety, but the absence of meaning itself. We have conquered nature, extended lifespans, created material abundance beyond the wildest dreams of our ancestors. Yet, surveys consistently show rising rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide in the wealthiest nations. We are the first civilization in history to suffer not from scarcity but from a surfeit of comfort that fails to satisfy. Albert Camus opened his philosophical essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, with the declaration, "There is only one really serious philosophical question, and that is suicide." He was not advocating self-destruction, but confronting the fundamental question meaninglessness poses. If nothing matters, why continue? If the universe is indifferent to our existence, if our lives signify nothing in the grand scheme, if death erases everything we build, why not simply end the charade? The philosophy of meaninglessness is not abstract speculation for academics. It is the lived experience of millions who wake each morning to face another day of purposeless activity, who go through motions they can no longer justify, who feel the crushing weight of existence without essence. We are meaning-making creatures trapped in a universe that offers no inherent meaning. This is the existential condition of modern humanity. But perhaps the absence of given meaning is not a curse but an invitation. Perhaps meaninglessness is not the end of philosophy, but its beginning. The recognition that life might be fundamentally meaningless is not a modern invention. The ancient text of Ecclesiastes, traditionally attributed to King Solomon, opens with words that echo across millennia. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath a man of all his labour which he taketh under the sun? The preacher surveys all human endeavour, wisdom, pleasure, wealth, achievement, and finds each equally futile. Generations come and go, yet nothing changes. The sun rises and sets in endless repetition. What has been will be again. There is nothing new under the sun. This biblical text, written perhaps 3,000 years ago, articulates what would later be called nihilism, the view that life has no intrinsic meaning, purpose, or value. The preacher's conclusion is stark. All our striving is meaningless, a chasing after wind. Yet the text does not end in despair. Instead, it arrives at a peculiar wisdom. Since everything is meaningless, one might as well eat, drink, and find enjoyment in one's work, for this too is from the hand of God. If nothing matters absolutely, then the simple pleasures of existence matter relatively. The Greek philosopher Hegesias, called the Death Persuader, taught that happiness was impossible to achieve and that life therefore had no purpose. His lectures in Alexandria reportedly caused such an epidemic of suicides that he was banned from teaching. This reveals something essential about meaninglessness. It is not merely an intellectual position, but an existential poison that can paralyze the will to live. In Eastern philosophy, Buddhism begins with a similar recognition, the first noble truth, that existence is dukkha suffering, unsatisfactoriness, a fundamental out-of-jointness with reality. The Buddha observed that everything we desire is impermanent. We cling to what cannot be held. We build identities that will dissolve. We seek permanent satisfaction in a world of constant flux. This recognition could lead to nihilistic despair, yet Buddhism transforms it into the foundation for liberation. By accepting impermanence rather than fighting it, by releasing attachment rather than intensifying it, suffering can be transcended. The distinction is crucial: meaninglessness as diagnosis versus meaninglessness as disease. One can recognize that the universe contains no inherent meaning without concluding that existence is therefore worthless. This is the difference between philosophical nihilism and psychological nihilism, between an intellectual position and a spiritual crisis. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this distinction better than perhaps any philosopher before or since. He announced that God is dead, not as celebration but as catastrophe. For millennia, God had served as the foundation for meaning, morality, and purpose. Western civilization had organized itself around transcendent values grounded in divine authority. With the rise of science, rationalism, and historical criticism, these foundations were eroding. Nietzsche saw that most people had not yet recognized what this meant. If God is dead, if there is no transcendent ground for values, then everything built upon that foundation collapses. This was not merely the death of religion, but the death of meaning itself. Nietzsche called this condition nihilism, and he predicted it would dominate the coming centuries. He was correct. The 20th century became a laboratory for nihilism, producing ideologies of meaninglessness that killed millions, totalitarian systems that reduced humans to material for social engineering, wars of unprecedented scale fought over abstractions, technological advancement divorced from ethical wisdom. Nietzsche distinguished between passive nihilism and active nihilism. Passive nihilism is the exhausted recognition that nothing matters, leading to withdrawal, despair, and decadence. This was the nihilism Nietzsche feared most, not the aggressive destruction of values, but their slow erosion, leaving behind only comfort-seeking, risk avoidance, and spiritual emptiness. He called this the last man, the human being who has made life so safe and comfortable that nothing is worth suffering for, nothing is worth striving toward. The last man blinks and says, "We have discovered happiness." Active nihilism, by contrast, is the aggressive destruction of old values to make space for new creation. If the old gods are dead, we must become gods ourselves. If there is no inherent meaning, we must create meaning. This is the will to power, not mere domination, but the fundamental drive to overcome, to transform, to impose form on chaos. Nietzsche proposed the Übermensch, the overman who would create values rather than discovering them, who would say yes to life despite its meaninglessness, who would embrace eternal recurrence, the idea that one would willingly live the same life infinitely with all its suffering and joy. But Nietzsche's solution is perhaps too heroic for most humans. It requires extraordinary psychological strength to create meaning ex nihilo, to bear the weight of absolute freedom, to affirm existence without external justification. Most people cannot sustain this. They need meaning given, not created. When that given meaning collapses, they fall into crisis. The existentialists of the 20th century wrestled with precisely this crisis. Jean-Paul Sartre declared that existence precedes essence. We are thrown into existence without predetermined nature or purpose. We are condemned to be free, burdened with the terrible responsibility of creating ourselves and our values without guidance. This freedom produces anguish, the dizzying awareness that we are solely responsible for what we become. Sartre illustrated this with the example of a student during World War II torn between joining the resistance and staying home to care for his mother. No moral system could tell him definitively what to do. Christian ethics, Kantian duty, utilitarian calculation each could justify either choice. He had to choose, and his choice would create his values, reveal his authentic commitments. This is the existential situation. We must act without certainty, create meaning without foundation, commit without guarantee. For Sartre, this led to radical freedom and radical responsibility. We are nothing but what we make of ourselves, through our choices. There is no human nature to excuse us, no divine plan to justify us, no social role to hide behind. We are absolutely free, and therefore absolutely responsible. Bad faith is the attempt to escape this responsibility by pretending we are not free, claiming we had no choice, that circumstances compelled us, that we are simply fulfilling our role. Albert Camus approached meaninglessness from a different angle. He called the human condition absurd, the confrontation between our need for meaning and the universe's indifference to that need. We are meaning-seeking creatures in a meaningless cosmos. This is the absurd, and it cannot be resolved, only confronted. Camus rejected both suicide, physical escape from the absurd, and philosophical suicide, leap of faith, into religion or ideology. Instead, he advocated rebellion, conscious awareness of the absurd combined with refusal to surrender to it. His symbol was Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a mountain only to watch it roll back down, repeating this forever. This seems the perfect image of meaningless existence, endless labor producing nothing, eternal repetition without progress. Yet Camus ends his essay with a startling claim. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Why? Because Sisyphus is conscious. He knows his fate is absurd. He has no illusions. And in that clear-eyed recognition, in the decision to continue despite everything, he achieves a kind of victory. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a human heart. This is Camus' answer to meaninglessness, not finding meaning but creating it through rebellion, through solidarity with other humans in the face of cosmic indifference, through passion and engagement with life despite knowing it leads nowhere. Meaning is not discovered but generated through committed action. Yet there is something unsatisfying in Camus' solution, a heroic posture that seems difficult to sustain over the course of an ordinary life. Can we really imagine Sisyphus happy? Or is this philosophical bravado masking deeper despair? The existentialists wrote beautifully about freedom and authenticity, but they also drank heavily, suffered breakdowns, and struggled with the very meaninglessness they claimed to overcome. Their lives suggest that philosophical solutions to existential problems are partial at best. Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, approached meaninglessness from the perspective of clinical practice rather than abstract philosophy. He observed that the inmates who survived the concentration camps were not necessarily the strongest or healthiest, but those who maintained a sense of purpose, a task to complete, a person to reunite with, a testimony to deliver. Those who lost their sense of meaning often died within days, even if physically capable of surviving. Frankl concluded that humans can endure almost any suffering if they have a reason, a why to live for. What destroys us is not suffering itself, but meaningless suffering. After the war, Frankl developed logotherapy, a therapeutic approach centered on helping patients discover meaning. He identified three primary sources: creative work or deeds, experiencing something or encountering someone, particularly through love, and the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. Even when we cannot change our circumstances, we can choose how we respond to them. This last freedom, the freedom to choose one's attitude, cannot be taken away even in the most degrading conditions. Frankl criticized what he called the existential vacuum, the widespread feeling of inner emptiness characteristic of modern society. Unlike previous generations who struggled with material scarcity, modern people had unprecedented comfort, but suffered from a lack of purpose. This vacuum manifested as boredom, apathy, and what he termed Sunday neurosis, the depression that descends when the week's busyness stops and people confront their inner emptiness. He argued that meaning cannot be given or invented arbitrarily. We cannot simply decide that stamp collecting or crossword puzzles will serve as our ultimate purpose and expect this to satisfy the soul's hunger for significance. Rather, meaning must be discovered in concrete life situations. Each person has a unique meaning to fulfill, a specific task that only they can complete. The question is not, what is the meaning of life? But, what is life asking of me? What is my particular responsibility in this situation? This shifts the framework from demanding meaning from life to recognizing that life demands meaning from us. We are questioned by existence, and we answer through our choices and actions. This inversion transforms passive victimhood into active responsibility. But Frankl's emphasis on discovering meaning assumes there is meaning to discover, that existence somehow contains or implies purpose waiting to be found. This assumption is precisely what the thoroughgoing nihilist rejects. What if there is no meaning to discover? no cosmic question being asked, no purpose embedded in existence. What if Frankl's patients felt better because humans psychologically require meaning narratives, even fictional ones? This leads to the postmodern critique of meaning itself. Thinkers like Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault argued that all meaning systems are human constructions serving power interests. There is no transcendent truth, no objective values, no essential human nature. What we call meaning is simply the temporary stabilization of linguistic and social systems that could have been otherwise. Religion, morality, philosophy, science, all are contingent narratives we tell ourselves, none more fundamentally true than others. Postmodernism embraces meaninglessness not as tragedy but as liberation. If there are no essential truths binding us, we are free to play with meaning, to construct and deconstruct identities, to reject oppressive grand narratives. The death of God and the collapse of metaphysics need not produce despair. They can produce creative freedom, ironic distance, playful experimentation. Yet this celebration of meaninglessness often feels hollow, a sophisticated form of nihilism that generates clever academic papers but fails to address the lived experience of those suffering from existential emptiness. The postmodern academic who deconstructs meaning during the day still faces the same fundamental questions when alone at night. Why continue? What justifies this existence? The ironic stance toward all values does not eliminate the need for something to live for. It simply makes that need seem naive or illegitimate. Carl Jung approached meaninglessness from yet another angle. He observed that the loss of religious meaning in the modern world created a psychological crisis. Religion, whatever its metaphysical truth or falsehood, had served essential psychological functions. It provided symbols that connected conscious and unconscious, rituals that marked life transitions, myths that oriented existence within a larger story, communities that offered belonging. The death of God meant not just the loss of a theological proposition, but the dismantling of the symbolic architecture that had sustained psychic health. Jung noticed that his patients often suffered from what he called a loss of soul, a disconnection from the deeper layers of the psyche. They were identified entirely with the ego, with conscious rationality, cut off from the unconscious sources of meaning and vitality. Their lives had become one-dimensional, flattened, stripped of the numinous quality that makes existence feel significant. His therapeutic approach involved helping patients reconnect with the symbolic dimension of experience through dreams, active imagination, and engagement with mythological and religious symbols not as literal truths, but as expressions of archetypal patterns in the collective unconscious. Meaning, for Jung, emerged not from intellectual philosophy but from lived relationship with the deeper self, with what he called the self, the archetype of wholeness, and the image of God in the psyche. Jung wrote that the central neurosis of modern people was meaninglessness, and that this neurosis could not be cured through rational argument, but only through symbolic experience and the process of individuation becoming whole, integrating unconscious contents, living in alignment with one's deepest nature. He stated, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." This suggests that the problem of meaninglessness cannot be solved at the level of abstract philosophy. It is not an intellectual problem requiring an argument, but an existential problem requiring transformation. We do not think our way into meaning. We live our way into it through concrete engagement with our unique circumstances, relationships, and inner development. Yet this raises the question, is the meaning Jung's patients discovered real or therapeutic fiction? If engagement with archetypal symbols produces psychological healing, does that make the symbols true in any objective sense, or merely useful? Jung himself was ambiguous on this point, sometimes speaking of archetypes as if they were autonomous realities, other times as psychological constructs. The question, is this really meaningful or merely feels meaningful, may itself be misguided, assuming a distinction that dissolves under examination. the Russian existentialist Lev Shestov argued that rational philosophy inherently leads to meaninglessness because reason demands that reality conform to logical necessity, but existence precedes logic. Being is prior to thought. When we try to capture existence in rational categories, we kill it, transforming living reality into dead abstractions. Shestov called for a rejection of reason's tyranny, a leap into faith beyond justification, an embrace of the absurd and inexplicable dimensions of existence that rational thought must exclude. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard anticipated this critique a century earlier. He argued that the quest for objective meaning was fundamentally misguided because existence is subjective. Truth is not something we observe from a detached position, but something we live from within passionate commitment. The person who spends their life analyzing the meaning of life from a distance has missed the point entirely. Life is not a puzzle to solve, but a reality to be lived. Kierkegaard distinguished between the aesthetic, ethical, and religious stages of existence. The aesthetic individual seeks meaning through pleasure, novelty, and immediate experience. But this leads to boredom and despair because no pleasure lasts, no novelty remains new. The aesthetic life consumes itself, endlessly seeking the next stimulation to fill an inner void that cannot be filled this way. The ethical individual finds meaning through duty, commitment, and universal moral principles. This provides stability and dignity lacking in aesthetic existence. Yet it too leads to despair when the individual realizes the impossibility of perfectly fulfilling ethical demands, when the gap between who one is and who one ought to be becomes unbearable. The religious stage transcends both through what Kierkegaard called the leap of faith, a decision to commit to the absolute despite the lack of rational justification, despite the scandal to reason that faith represents. This is not blind belief, but passionate inwardness, subjective truth, a relationship with God that cannot be mediated by philosophy or theology. Meaning comes not from rational comprehension, but from existing in the presence of the eternal. Abraham, commanded by God to sacrifice his son Isaac, becomes Kierkegaard's model. By all ethical and rational standards, this command is abominable. Yet Abraham trusts God absolutely, making what Kierkegaard calls a teleological suspension of the ethical, placing faith above universal moral law. This is terrifying, scandalous, impossible to justify to others or even to oneself. It is absurd, but it is also, Kierkegaard suggests, the only authentic relationship with ultimate meaning. Modern secular people often recoil from this religious solution, seeing it as escape from freedom, return to pre-critical thinking, refusal to face meaninglessness honestly. Yet, Kierkegaard would argue that the secular position is itself a form of escape, using reason to avoid the leap, remaining in detached observation to avoid passionate commitment, choosing comfortable despair over risky faith. The novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky explored meaninglessness through fiction with a psychological depth that philosophy rarely achieves. In Notes from Underground, the underground man embodies the corrosive effects of radical self-consciousness. He is hyper-aware, endlessly analyzing his own motives, unable to act spontaneously because every potential action appears equally arbitrary and meaningless. He sees through all conventional values, recognizes all social roles as performances, understands that consciousness itself is a disease. The underground man declares that twice two makes four is an insufferable thing, a limitation on human freedom. He would rather assert that twice two makes five simply to prove he is not a mechanical being governed by rational necessity. This is Shestov's rebellion against reason expressed as neurotic spite. But it leads nowhere except deeper into isolation and bitterness. The underground man ends his notes still trapped in his underground, unable to escape the prison of his own consciousness. In The Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky presents the full range of responses to meaninglessness through different characters. Ivan articulates the rationalist position. If God does not exist and the soul is not immortal, then everything is permitted. Without transcendent meaning, morality becomes arbitrary convention, Ivan cannot accept a world where innocent children suffer, where cosmic injustice reigns. He returns his ticket to God's universe, rejecting existence because it fails to make rational sense. Yet Ivan's rationalism drives him mad. He is haunted by hallucinations, tormented by guilt, unable to live consistently with his stated philosophy. His intellectual rejection of meaning destroys him psychologically. Meanwhile, his brother Alyosha follows the religious path embodied by Father Zosima, finding meaning through love, humility, and faith. And their brother Dmitri, sensual and passionate, finds redemption through suffering, discovering meaning not intellectually, but through lived transformation. Dostoevsky's conclusion, expressed through these characters and their fates, is that meaninglessness cannot be overcome intellectually. Ivan's brilliant arguments remain unanswered philosophically, yet they prove insufficient for life. Meaning is not a proposition to be proven, but a reality to be experienced through faith, love, and suffering. The heart has reasons that reason does not know. The 20th century playwright Samuel Beckett gave meaninglessness its most austere artistic expression. In Waiting for Godot, two tramps wait endlessly for someone who never comes. Nothing happens. Nothing changes. They consider leaving but do not. They discuss suicide but do not attempt it. They fill time with circular conversations, repetitive routines, absurd exchanges that lead nowhere. The play has no plot, no development, no resolution. It simply is existence without essence, time without purpose, consciousness without meaning. Audiences initially found the play baffling, frustrating, even infuriating. What is the point? Why should we watch 2 hours of pointless waiting? But this reaction is precisely what Beckett intended. We demand that art have meaning, that narratives serve purpose, that time spent watching be justified. The play refuses these demands, forcing us to confront our own need for meaning by denying it. Vladimir and Estragon wait for Godot, who never arrives, just as humans wait for meaning that never comes. Yet they continue, they endure. The waiting itself becomes their existence. Beckett's work suggests that meaninglessness might be the fundamental condition we must accept rather than a problem to solve. Perhaps the error is expecting meaning, demanding justification, requiring that existence serve some purpose beyond itself. Perhaps we should simply be like the characters in Waiting for Godot, without needing existence to mean anything more than it is. This brings us to the Buddhist perspective, which neither affirms nor denies meaning but rather deconstructs the question itself. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises from tanha, craving, thirst, the insatiable desire for things to be other than they are. We suffer not because life is meaningless, but because we demand that it be meaningful in specific ways, because we cling to impermanent things as if they were permanent, because we construct narratives of self that reality continuously contradicts. The Buddha's third noble truth is that suffering can cease through the elimination of craving. This is not nihilism, despite appearances. It is not saying nothing matters, so why try? It is saying that our whole framework of demanding meaning is itself the problem. When we release the need for existence to justify itself, when we stop clinging to narratives of purpose, we discover what Zen calls suchness, reality as it is, before thought divides it into meaningful and meaningless. A Zen master was asked, "What is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West?" A traditional question about the ultimate meaning of Buddhist teaching. The master replied, "The cypress tree in the garden." This non-answer points beyond conceptual meaning to direct experience of what is. The tree does not symbolize anything. It does not mean anything. It simply is, perfectly itself, complete without justification. Western philosophy has largely been unable to accept this dissolution of the meaning question, precisely because Western thought is founded on the primacy of logos, reason, meaning, order, intelligibility. From Plato onward, the assumption has been that reality is fundamentally rational, that the cosmos is ordered, that truth can be grasped through thought. To abandon meaning is to abandon the entire Western philosophical project. Yet some Western thinkers approach the Eastern insight. Arthur Schopenhauer, influenced by Hindu and Buddhist texts, argued that the world is fundamentally will-blind, purposeless striving, without goal or meaning. All life is suffering because will can never be satisfied. Each desire fulfilled generates new desires. Satisfaction is always temporary, suffering permanent. We are puppets dancing on the strings of metaphysical will, mistaking our compulsions for free choices, our driven existence for purposeful life. Schopenhauer's solution resembled Buddhism: deny the will through aesthetic contemplation, ascetic practice, and ultimately the negation of the will to live itself. In moments of aesthetic experience, absorbed in music, art, or nature, we temporarily escape the tyranny of will. We cease being subjects who want and become pure, perceiving consciousness. These moments are the only respite from meaningless suffering that existence offers. But Schopenhauer's philosophy is profoundly pessimistic, in a way Buddhism is not. Buddhism offers liberation, nirvana, the cessation of suffering through enlightenment. Schopenhauer offers only temporary escape and final extinction. He saw birth itself as a catastrophe, existence as something we should not have been burdened with. His philosophy validates the intuition of meaninglessness but provides little consolation beyond the recommendation to minimize suffering through withdrawal from life. This philosophical pessimism found its modern expression in the antinatalist position, articulated by thinkers like David Benatar, who argues that coming into existence is always a harm. The asymmetry between pleasure and pain means that existence necessarily involves more suffering than benefit. The ethical conclusion is that we should not reproduce, that humanity should voluntarily cease to exist. This is meaninglessness taken to its logical extreme. Not only is there no meaning, but existence itself is a mistake to be corrected through extinction. Yet, humans persistently resist this conclusion. Even those who intellectually accept meaninglessness typically do not act on it. Schopenhauer himself lived to 72, indulging in good meals and philosophical fame. Camus wrote extensively about suicide, while never seriously considering it. The gap between philosophical conclusions and lived existence suggests that meaning operates at a level deeper than rational argument. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio has shown that emotions and bodily states fundamentally shape what we experience as meaningful. Patients with damage to brain regions processing emotion can reason perfectly but make catastrophically bad decisions because they lack the somatic markers that make outcomes feel significant. They can list pros and cons endlessly but cannot care which option they choose. Meaning, it turns out, is not a cognitive judgment but an embodied feeling. This suggests that the philosophy of meaninglessness may be addressing the wrong level of human experience. We are not primarily rational beings who think about meaning and then feel accordingly. We are embodied creatures who feel meaning, or its absence, and then construct intellectual justifications. The existential crisis of meaninglessness may have less to do with philosophical problems than with material conditions, social alienation, and psychological disconnection. The sociologist Emil Durkheim studied suicide rates across different populations and discovered that they correlated not with poverty or hardship, but with what he called anomie, a state of normlessness, the breakdown of social bonds and shared values. When individuals are integrated into communities with clear norms and mutual obligations, suicide rates are low. When social integration collapses and people become isolated atoms pursuing individual goals without shared framework, suicide rates spike. This suggests that meaninglessness is not an individual philosophical problem but a collective social crisis. Meaning emerges through shared narratives, communal rituals, recognized roles within functioning social structures. The modern condition that produces widespread meaninglessness is characterized by fragmented communities, weakened institutions, the privatization of meaning-making. We have been told to find our own meaning, create our own values, author our own lives, but humans are fundamentally social creatures who generate meaning together, not alone. Traditional societies embedded individuals in networks of kinship, obligation, and shared cosmology. Your life had meaning because you played a recognized role in a larger story. You were a member of a tribe, a link in the ancestral chain, part of a cosmic drama. Modernity promised liberation from these constraining identities, offering instead individual freedom and self-creation. But in destroying the structures that provided given meaning, modernity left individuals isolated, burdened with constructing meaning from nothing, free but lost. The sociologist Max Weber called this the disenchantment of the world, the historical process by which magic, mystery, and meaning were systematically eliminated through rationalization, bureaucratization, and scientific reduction. What was once alive with significance became mere mechanism. Nature ceased to be sacred and became resource. Human beings ceased to be souls and became organisms. The cosmos ceased to be meaningful order and became meaningless matter governed by blind laws. Weber saw this process as irreversible. We cannot return to enchanted consciousness. We know too much. But disenchantment leaves us in an iron cage of rationalized existence, where efficiency replaces meaning, where instrumental reason dominates but cannot tell us what purposes are worth pursuing. We have perfected the means to achieve ends, but lost clarity about what ends are worth achieving. Some contemporary thinkers have tried to re-enchant existence through various means. The philosopher Charles Taylor argues for recovering the fullness that pre-modern people experienced, a sense of connection to something beyond the self, whether God, nature, or community. He suggests that secular modernity's exclusive humanism, while valuable, has lost access to transcendence, leaving people feeling trapped in immanence, unable to experience existence as opening onto something beyond mundane reality. The psychologist Jordan Peterson has attempted to revive religious meaning without requiring literal belief through an emphasis on archetypal narratives and evolutionary psychology. He argues that ancient myths encode practical wisdom about how to live, that the idea of God serves essential psychological functions, regardless of metaphysical truth, that meaning emerges from taking on responsibility and living in accordance with deep narratives embedded in human nature. Critics argue that these attempts at re-enchantment are exercises in self-deception, that we cannot unknow what modernity has taught us, that meaning constructed through willful belief is inauthentic. If we know we are telling ourselves stories, if we recognize religious symbols as human projections, can they still genuinely provide meaning? Or are we like children who continue playing make-believe after realizing it is only pretend? This points to a fundamental tension. Meaning seems to require some element of belief, of taking something as ultimately true or valuable. But modern critical consciousness makes all belief provisional, subject to doubt, recognized as contingent. We are simultaneously too sophisticated to believe naively and too human to live without believing in something. Perhaps the way forward lies not in resolving this tension, but in accepting it as the permanent condition of reflective existence. We are beings who require meaning, while knowing that meaning is not given but constructed. We need narratives to live by, while recognizing that all narratives are partial, provisional, and could have been otherwise. This is not a problem to solve, but a paradox to inhabit. The philosopher Paul Ricoeur spoke of a second naivete, the possibility of post-critical belief, of engaging with religious and mythological symbols after having subjected them to rational critique. This is different from pre-critical literalism, which simply accepts tradition unreflectively. Second naivete knows that symbols are symbols, that myths are myths, yet finds truth in them nonetheless, not factual truth but existential truth, not scientific accuracy but lived meaningfulness. This requires what Ricoeur called a hermeneutics of trust, alongside the hermeneutics of suspicion characteristic of modern thought. Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud taught us to suspect all meaning claims as disguised power, resentment, or repression. This critical suspicion is essential and irreversible, but if we only suspect, only deconstruct, only reveal the contingency of all values, we are left with nothing to live by. Second, naivete trusts again, but differently, not naively believing all claims at face value, but recognizing that some symbols and narratives nourish human existence, even if they cannot be proven true in a scientific sense. Jung's approach to religious symbols exemplifies this. He did not claim that God exists as a metaphysical entity, but insisted that God is a psychological reality, an archetype of the collective unconscious that appears across cultures and throughout history. Whether God exists out there, independent of human consciousness, Jung considered an unanswerable metaphysical question. What mattered psychologically was that engagement with the God image transforms the psyche, provides orientation, and facilitates individuation. This pragmatic approach to meaning, judging beliefs by their effects rather than their correspondence to objective truth, has deep roots in American philosophy through William James and John Dewey. James argued that ideas are true insofar as they work, insofar as they prove useful in navigating experience. A belief in God is true if it makes one's life better, more coherent, more meaningful, regardless of whether God exists independently. Critics charge that this is wishful thinking, that we cannot simply believe whatever makes us feel better. Truth should correspond to reality, not merely serve psychological needs. But James would reply that the dichotomy between objective truth and subjective utility is false, that truth is not a static property but a dynamic process, that what corresponds to reality is itself shaped by our interests and purposes. This becomes particularly relevant for the question of meaning. We cannot step outside our human perspective to determine whether existence has objective meaning independent of human projects and concerns. The question, is there meaning, assumes we could take a God's eye view and assess reality neutrally. But we are always already embedded in meaning-making, always already interpreting, always already caring about some things and not others. The question is not whether meaning exists objectively, but what meanings we will create and commit to. Nietzsche's perspectivism anticipated this insight. He argued that there are no facts, only interpretations. Every perspective is conditioned by the values, interests, and life situation of the interpreter. There is no view from nowhere, no objective standpoint outside all perspectives. This does not mean all perspectives are equally valid. Some perspectives enhance life, others diminish it. Some expand possibilities, others restrict them. The question is not which perspective is objectively true, but which perspective serves life affirmation, growth, and creative power. For Nietzsche, the response to meaninglessness was amor fati, love of fate, saying yes to existence exactly as it is, including all suffering and tragedy. This is not passive acceptance, but active affirmation, choosing one's life so completely that one would will its eternal recurrence. If you could live your exact life again and again infinitely, would you? Most people would recoil in horror. Nietzsche's test reveals whether we truly affirm our existence or merely endure it. But can amor fati be willed? Can we simply decide to affirm existence and thereby find meaning? The attempt to force meaning often produces its opposite. The very effort reveals that meaning is absent, and we are desperately trying to create it through willpower. Authentic meaning seems to require a kind of grace, a gift that cannot be seized directly but only received. This points to the limitations of philosophy itself in addressing meaninglessness. Philosophy operates through reflection, analysis, and argument, but meaning is often disrupted by too much reflection. The centipede walks perfectly until asked which leg moves first, then it cannot walk at all. Similarly, life flows meaningfully until we step back and ask why, at which point meaning evaporates under analytical scrutiny. Existentialists recognize this, distinguishing between living authentically and theorizing about authenticity. Heidegger argued that philosophy, since Plato had forgotten, being itself in favor of analyzing beings. We study what exists, but lose touch with the sheer fact of existence, the mysterious that it is, which precedes all questions about what it is. Reconnection with being requires not more thinking but a kind of meditative openness, a letting be that allows things to presence in their mystery. This suggests that the philosophy of meaninglessness reaches its limit when it recognizes that philosophy cannot provide meaning. We need art, religion, love, work, community, concrete engagements with existence that generate meaning through participation rather than observation. The person who spends all their time analyzing the meaning of life is like someone who studies restaurant menus but never eats. Yet there is value in the philosophical examination of meaninglessness. It clears away false consolations, superficial answers, inherited beliefs we have not genuinely made our own. It is a kind of apophatic theology, defining meaning by negation, saying what it is not, stripping away illusions. This clearing can feel like devastation, but it creates space for something authentic to emerge. Many people report that periods of intense meaninglessness, while agonizing, ultimately transformed them. The dark night of the soul, where all previous meaning collapsed, became the threshold to deeper meaning. This is a common pattern in spiritual literature, the necessary dissolution that precedes new creation, the death that precedes rebirth, the descent that precedes ascent. Jung called this the nigredo, in alchemical terms the blackening, the putrefaction, where base matter dissolves into chaos before it can be transmuted into gold. Psychological development follows this pattern. The breakdown of inadequate personality structures creates terrible anxiety and confusion, but if endured rather than escaped, it allows more comprehensive integration. What felt like meaningless suffering reveals itself retrospectively as meaningful transformation. This retrospective recognition suggests that meaning is not always visible in the present moment. We often discover meaning backward, recognizing in hindsight that experiences which seemed pointless were actually essential to who we became. Viktor Frankl survived the concentration camps by creating meaning from suffering, deciding that his survival would serve the purpose of testifying, of developing his therapeutic insights, of proving that meaning can be found even in hell. The meaning was not inherent in the suffering, but created through his response to it. This points toward a final insight. Meaning is not something we find or create alone, but something that emerges through the relationship between self and world, between individual and community, between present experience and larger narrative. We are neither purely passive recipients of given meaning, nor purely active creators of arbitrary meaning. We are participants in an ongoing dialogue with existence, interpreting and being interpreted, shaping and being shaped. The Japanese concept of ikigai captures this participatory dimension of meaning. Often translated as reason for being, ikigai emerges at the intersection of what you love, what you are good at, what the world needs, and what you can be rewarded for. It is neither purely subjective, following only personal passion, nor purely objective, conforming only to external demands, but a harmonious integration of inner orientation and outer contribution. Traditional Okinawan culture, which gave rise to this concept, has some of the longest-lived people on Earth. Researchers attribute this partly to ikigai having a sense of purpose that gets you out of bed in the morning, that connects personal fulfillment with service to community. Meaning here is not abstract philosophy, but concrete daily practice, not theoretical justification, but lived coherence. This suggests that the Western framing of meaninglessness as primarily an intellectual problem may itself be mistaken. Perhaps meaninglessness is better understood as disconnection from one's body, from other people, from the natural world, from work that matters, from practices and rituals that mark time as sacred. The solution is not better arguments but better connections, not philosophical proof but embodied participation. The environmental crisis adds another dimension to meaninglessness. For the first time in history, we face the possibility of rendering the planet uninhabitable through our collective actions. This creates a unique form of existential absurdity. We continue our daily routines, going to work, paying bills, making plans, while knowing that the conditions for human civilization are rapidly deteriorating. The future we assume in all our small decisions may not exist. How do we find meaning when the world itself seems to be ending? Some respond with apocalyptic despair, concluding that nothing matters if humanity is doomed. Others find renewed meaning in resistance, in fighting for whatever future remains possible, in living as if our actions matter, even when outcomes are uncertain. The climate activist who knows their efforts may fail but continues anyway embodies what Camus meant by rebellion, the refusal to surrender to absurdity, even while acknowledging it. Indigenous wisdom traditions offer perspectives largely missing from Western philosophy. Many Native American cultures understand human life as embedded in larger cycles of reciprocity with the natural world and ancestors. You are not an isolated individual seeking personal meaning, but a link in a chain of generations, with obligations to those who came before and those who will come after. Meaning is given through this position in the great web of relations, through ceremonies that maintain cosmic balance, through stories that encode the wisdom of the people. The Lakota phrase "Mitakuye Oyasin," all my relations, expresses this worldview. You are related to everything: animals, plants, stones, stars, ancestors, future generations. Your life matters because you are part of this vast kinship network. The modern sense of meaninglessness may arise partly from the severing of these relationships, from viewing ourselves as autonomous individuals disconnected from larger wholes. The African philosophy of Ubuntu expresses a similar insight. I am because we are. Personhood is not individual but relational. You become a person through others, through community. Western philosophy since Descartes has started with the isolated thinking subject cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. Ubuntu reverses this, grounding existence in relationship rather than individual consciousness. From this perspective, meaninglessness is the result of radical individualism, the attempt to find meaning alone. These wisdom traditions suggest that the philosophy of meaninglessness is itself a culturally specific phenomenon, emerging from particular historical conditions, the breakdown of traditional communities, the rise of secular individualism, the dominance of instrumental rationality, the commodification of all values. In cultures where these conditions do not obtain, the question of life's meaning may not arise with the same existential urgency. Yet we cannot simply return to traditional worldviews. We are products of modernity, shaped by its freedoms and burdened by its discontents. We cannot unknow what we know, cannot re-enchant the world through willful ignorance, but we might learn from these traditions while remaining honestly modern, incorporating their insights about relationality, embodiment, and reciprocity, while acknowledging our position as inheritors of critical thought. Jung's concept of individuation offers such a path. It is neither regression to pre-modern collectivism nor embrace of modern atomistic individualism, but a third way, becoming whole by integrating the personal and the transpersonal, the individual and the archetypal, the conscious and the unconscious. Meaning emerges not from either pole alone, but from their dynamic relationship. In his memoir Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung described a moment of clarity after long struggle with meaninglessness. When Lao Tzu says, "All are clear, I alone am clouded," he is expressing what I now felt in advanced old age. Lao Tzu is the example of a man with superior insight, who has seen and experienced worth and worthlessness, and who at the end of his life desires to return into his own being, into the eternal unknowable meaning. The pursuit of meaning ends not in finding an answer, but in accepting the question, in dwelling in the mystery rather than demanding explanation. This acceptance is not resignation, but wisdom, recognizing that some questions are not meant to be answered, but lived. The question of meaning is not like a mathematical problem with a solution waiting to be discovered. It is more like a koan in Zen Buddhism, a paradox that breaks the mind's habitual patterns and opens awareness to what lies beyond conceptual thought. What then is the philosophy of meaninglessness? It is the recognition that meaning cannot be proven, cannot be objectively demonstrated, cannot be secured against all doubt. It is the acknowledgement that we are finite beings in an indifferent universe, that our lives are brief flickers in cosmic darkness, that death will erase everything we build. It is the honest confrontation with absurdity, the clear-eyed awareness that there is no ultimate justification for existence. But it is also the discovery that this very confrontation can become meaningful, that choosing to live despite meaninglessness is itself a form of meaning, that creating value in a valueless universe is an act of existential courage, that loving what is mortal, fleeting, and doomed is more profound than loving what is eternal, that finding beauty in a world that does not care whether we see it is a specifically human triumph. Rilke wrote, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage. Perhaps everything that frightens us is, in its deepest essence, something helpless that wants our love." Meaninglessness is the dragon we must face, and in facing it, not fleeing, not denying, not rationalizing, but truly facing it, we discover that the absence of given meaning is the presence of freedom. We are the beings who ask why, and in asking, we create the possibility of answer. Not an answer that pre-exists the question, not a meaning we discover like a hidden treasure, but a meaning we forge through the very act of questioning, of seeking, of living deliberately in the face of silence. This is our condition, blessed and cursed with consciousness, free and burdened with freedom, mortal and yet meaning makers. The philosophy of meaninglessness is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of wisdom.